Hello everybody. Today I decided to do my final presentation on NAFTA. Um, so, if you didn't know, NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. Established a free trade zone between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. It was signed in 1992. It went into effect in 1994. It was basically just they weren't going to charge each other tariffs for their goods. So like I said, if you didn't really know what it was, here's a brief little insight of what it is and how it came to be. So with that being said, what goods are being imported by the United States from Mexico? What always stood out to me, and you'll see this in the following slide too, is vehicles is number one. Vehicles is going to be your, it's going to include auto parts, vehicles. You see a lot of press about Chevrolet going down to Mexico, Ford. So that doesn't necessarily mean all their vehicles come to the United States from Mexico. It just means a $74 billion worth of vehicles are imported from Mexico. I think it just has to do with basically all this really stands out to me is all of NAFTA is just basically supply and demand. We demand lower price cars. Mexico offers us cheaper labor to the car manufacturers to produce those cars at a cheap level. So in turn, if they use labor in the United States at a higher cost, they're going to charge more for their cars, so demand will go down. So they just have to balance. It's just a constant battle to balance out supply and demand as far as these types of things. In the next slide, we're going to look at what Canada is exporting. Same thing, motor vehicles. From what I see, Canada, it's mostly parts. A lot of parts come from Canada. I mean, there are quite a bit of motor vehicles built in Canada, but you're looking mostly at parts. And then you can also look at what I found interesting was commercial services. What I found, and this happened just last week, is at my current employer, Tyson Foods, they were looking at some new machinery, and they came in to service and set it up, etc. And the servicing company was Canadian. I found that pretty interesting that somebody from Canada would have poultry processing equipment. So forestry products are obviously pretty big with as much forest as Canada has. And then, farming, fishing. I think Canada is more big, and they're a big exporter of beef. This doesn't really break out the graph or break out the different categories in the detail I would like, but I found this provided the most information in an easily identifiable way. Okay, on the next slide. So, is NAFTA really bad for the United States? If you've been anywhere in the last year, heard our 45th president here, Mr. Donald J. Trump, talking a lot about how bad NAFTA is. So I had me thinking, is it really that bad? Well, if you look at this graph that I found, it shows we have a net gain of exports. So we're exporting more than we're importing from Canada. So we are, obviously at a gain here. We're at a 6% gain from the imports to Mexico. Where I disagree with President Trump is that he always seems to imply Mexico. He never mentions Canada. It's always Mexico, Mexico, Mexico. That just never made sense to me. He likes to just always talk about Mexico. Well, Canada is just as big in this game as Mexico is. Now, where Canada may be a little different is the labor cost. I don't think people are jumping up to move factories to Canada. The factories are all going down to Mexico due to the cheap labor. So, I mean, you always got to think about things and be informed before you make decisions. You got to always remember it's Canada and Mexico. So, and this is another thing I found that it just didn't sound that bad either. Though we did get an increase in our trade deficit, we still increased exports, just like I showed you in the previous slide. So it's just the Mexico and them. Tells you right here they have comparative advantages in us, but at the same time we increased exports, and they said that something we did was services. So we're providing services. We've got to send people down there to train them, to set up these factories, to set up the machines, to do all the kind of legwork in getting these factories established, and somebody has to do with this. So that's where we have an advantage in this, is I would say technology. We have an advance in technology, more educated people to set up all this stuff. Next slide. So I started looking at what is bad about NAFTA. So, like the first bullet point here says that the lower wages reduce some United States wages. Say that's more in the manufacturing department. It tells you that the labor unions lost the ability to negotiate with the companies, because the companies could just now say, well, we're moving to Mexico. We don't care what you want. Look at the carrier industries from, I'd say, beginning of 2017, about a year ago. The labor unions came out and they said, we just don't have any bargaining chips anymore. And then on the second bullet point, I found this interesting, that some people accuse NAFTA exploiting Mexico workers, destroying its farms, polluting its environments. Basically, they're saying that Mexico can't compete with our subsidized grain products, so they're used to way more fertilizer on marginal land just to get the output needed to compete with the United States as far as grain. So, the world, our environment, could be affected by NAFTA. So what will happen if NAFTA ends? First bullet point, it says exports to both Mexico and Canada would decrease. That's pretty obvious. Something I didn't know is that they had high tariffs on the United States for the beef, rice, soybean. Basically, what I just mentioned are agricultural products, because they just can't compete with us. And then it goes back into the farmers, that they don't want to lose 17.9 billion in agricultural products they exported to Mexico. Again, I just told you, Mexico can't compete with us on our subsidized grain. And it tells you right here why these farmers are concerned, is their Mexican buyers are hesitating to sign long-term contracts. They're already fearful, trying to prepare for the uncertainty of, if President Trump ends NAFTA, they're already looking for other markets. So, 17.9 billion in agricultural products is going to be a major hit to our farming industry. Next slide. So my thoughts on NAFTA. I think NAFTA, I would say in most ways it's a good thing. Anytime you're exporting more than you're importing, it's going to be a good thing. Like I said, I'd mentioned I have not been directly affected by NAFTA, moving my job to Mexico. So my feelings on it are kind of like I said, they're very unbiased. I like to make my assumptions on education by researching a topic and looking at the topic before I make a judgment call on it. I think today we get told something is bad, and that we need to not just be sheep and listen to people. We need to make our own assumptions before we just listen to people. There's countless hard facts on NAFTA online, and I just implore everybody, before you make a judgment call on something being bad or good, look at these topics, look at the facts, and then make your decision. Also, all my works cited for all my pictures and graphs are going to be in the comment boxes in the top right corner. So again, I want to thank everybody. I enjoyed the class. I look forward to graduating and getting done with school. Thanks.